In this treaty, we seek to establish freedom from aggression and from the use of force in the North Atlantic community. This is the area which has been at the heart of the last two world conflicts. To protect this area against war will be a long step toward permanent peace in the whole world.
In Mons and Brussels, Belgium, this is An Enduring Alliance, a podcast reflecting on the 70-year history of NATO and its oldest military headquarters, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers, Europe. Hi, and thanks for tuning into An Enduring Alliance, a podcast reflecting on the 70-year history of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, and its oldest military headquarters, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers, Europe. I am U.S. Army Master Sergeant Alex Burnett, a media operations specialist assigned to SHAPE.
And I am Dr. Stella Adorf. I'm a German NATO international civilian and the SHAPE historical advisor.
And I'm Dr. Linda Risso, a historical consultant at SHAPE. I'm an Italian citizen living in London.
I want to make it clear that this is not the first episode of our podcast. In the military, we never start a project on day one. We always start on day 0.
So does this make episode 0?
Yeah, it does. And that's appropriate, right? This is a political and military organization.
Also, since the actual 70th anniversary is in 2 weeks, I suppose episode 0 is an appropriate title.
So what are we going to talk about for episode 0, if not the history? After all, this is why you brought me all the way from London.
Well, let's cover why we're doing this. Why is it important that we communicate the history of NATO?
You mean besides the immense impact our organization has had on the world in both the political and military arenas?
And the fact that it is considered by many experts to be the most successful alliance in history?
Yeah, all of those things. But what else?
Something I feel we should discuss are information challenges faced by NATO 70 years after its creation. And we spoke to Carmen Romero, the Deputy Assistant Secretary General of NATO for Public Diplomacy, about just that.
Speaking about the history of this alliance, in my view, it's very important to stress the fact that for 70 years, the bond between Europe and North America has made NATO the strongest alliance in history. And this is because we are an alliance that is bound by shared history, by shared goals, by shared values, and together we work, as I was saying earlier, to prevent conflict and to preserve peace for nearly 1 billion people in our countries, which is a huge, a figure.
In spite of NATO's existence for 69 years, 11 months and 18 days, there are still many misconceptions about what NATO does and how it came into existence.
And that is why we are so happy to have the support of Mr. Mark Laity, who is the Communications Division Director at SHAPE, and we're going to hear why he thinks that this project is so important.
Unless you understand where NATO came from and what infused it and what made it happen and its core values, then you won't understand what it still means and where it's going. History is what guides us. History is what teaches us. The story of NATO, the narrative, infuses the values which we still defend. So we need to understand NATO's history because we need to understand NATO. And when you understand NATO, you can see why it still matters and why it still has a huge job to do that it will continue to do.
So throughout the course of NATO's history, since you've been a part of the organization for quite some time now, what, in your opinion, is one of the things that you feel very enthusiastic about? What is something special that you would like to hear highlighted?
I think the ability of a differing number of nations, now 29, to understand what they share and then act very robustly. It's very easy to look at multinational organizations and just see that they're all talk and no action. NATO is an action organization, both being within it and also as somebody who reported on it as a journalist. You could see that when NATO agreed on something, it made a big difference. And for instance, as a journalist, I saw in Bosnia, the UN had good soldiers, good intent, but it couldn't get the job done. But when the NATO came in, the same soldiers under a different command could And that wasn't because the soldiers were suddenly better, it's because it was the right organization for the right time. So NATO is an action organization, and once it agrees to do something, it stays doing. And that's very important.
So there you have it from a communication expert himself. So to wrap up episode 0, why don't you two doctors of history tell our audience about some big things that we're going to cover in the next few months?
Of course, we're going to have episodes about the foundation of both NATO and SHAPE. We will also discuss the rise of communism in the world and its impact on the alliance. That includes the raising of the Berlin Wall and a little clandestine operation called Live Oak.
We will talk about the shift in political and military strategy after the downfall of Soviet Russia and the end of the communist threat. We will also have an episode covering NATO operations in the Balkans. And finally, we will talk about the attacks on September 11, 2001, the invocation of Article 5, and combat operation in Afghanistan.
In our final episode, we will leave you with a glimpse into where the alliance is today, both politically and militarily, and what lies in store in our future.
So come back on April 4, 2019 to celebrate the 70th anniversary of NATO and to download Episode 1, Birth of an Alliance.
Also be sure to check out our website at shape.nato.int/history/podcast. And thank you for tuning in.